Squatting can be a pain in the ass, and I say that as somebody who's built to squat. I often wonder, if it was difficult for me with my short legs, how difficult must it be for other people? People with tight ankles, long legs, people who are new and are flooded with a million different cues that they all think they're missing out on. So I'm going to take my experience solving my problems, but also working with hundreds of people, to boil it down to 3 big things I think are causing people to struggle the most. Before we get into that, I have to make a big announcement. I'm teaming up with the kings of gym apparel, Barbell Apparel, for a 4th of July giveaway. Between now and 4th of July 2024, we're giving away not one, but 3 $100 gift cards to Barbell Apparel. You can stock up on Bromley tees, Big Dreams bad jeans. You can get any of the pieces of comfortable performance-based gear. I see you guys peeping my Instagram when I film pressing exercises from behind. You think the view looks that good because of squats and deadlifts. That is Barbell Apparel shorts, baby. Now, all you need to be eligible is to have subscribed to the YouTube channel and to download the Base Strength AI app and take the questionnaire. You do not need to pay anything. You do not need an active membership. Just download the app from basestrength.com and take the questionnaire, and you're in the running. And with 3 opportunities to win, your chances are pretty good. We will announce the winners on 4th of July, so to those at home and everybody abroad, this is a little gift to you from Murica. First, we're going to start with the foot. Now, there was a big fetish in lifting culture for a long time that obsessed over the foot, like that was the one thing everybody had to do, because it was kind of new territory, but it got kind of weird and gimmicky. The foot's important to know because for the people that it's sidelining, they're not going to fix their squat until they get to the bottom of that issue. But for everybody else, feeling what your foot actually does has the potential to improve everything that goes off downstream of that point. So even if you just get a little bit of a conceptual understanding of how your feet engage the squat, you might find that the cues you focus on with your knees, your hips, and everything else kind of go a little bit better. What I'm worried about is the actual engagement of the foot that creates stability and gives you a sense of control over the rest of the squat. Just like when we bench, you're not going to grab that bar with limp wrists. You're going to squeeze the shit out of it, because a radiation means that squeezing up here is going to make everything else tense. You're going to get more rigidness. The communication that allows expression of power is going to go off a lot better. So we always start by trying to break the bar with our hands. Just leave your fingerprints in it. Your feet in the squat are no different. Now, I squatted for a long time unaware of my feet. I might as well have been a diabetic that had no sensation. They were just stumps for me to kind of balance on, and I forced the rest of my body to work around it. But the first time I took my shoes off, kind of let my toes dig into the mat, and I tried to suction the floor like I was a monkey and I was trying to pick the mats up off the ground, I felt a handle that wasn't really there before. And that's something I've had a lot of clients do. It's something that can help reinforce stability that wasn't there before. So if you're trying to focus on where your knees are going, if you're trying to feel tension through your knees or your glutes, you're trying to push your knees out or spread the floor or do something with your chest, by virtue of your feet being stable, you know that you have a much more firm, even ground to execute that cue off of. So it's really important you make sure that there is something that looks like activation at that point. Generally, you'll hear people talk about 3 points of pressure: your heel, right by your big toe, right by your pinky toe. And if you just kind of focus on grabbing the mat with that point, you're going to feel that everything's a lot more even. Now, that can also help with people with collapsed arches. This is a problem with your feet that will fuck your squat until you get to the bottom of it. Sometimes it's tension up around your groin or in your hips. It kind of draws everything in and forces your feet to kind of roll in. Other times it's dysfunction with your actual foot and ankle, but you need your shin bone stacked directly over your foot, and you need your foot evenly distributed over the ground. And if your arches are collapsing, you're not going to do that. So really focusing on grabbing the ground, starting with that position, is going to help you get to the bottom of those problems. So now that your feet are firmly planted on the ground, it's going to make it a lot easier to settle into your best possible position. It's important to know that there are a million different squat setups that have led to world records, and the reasons for picking one are different for everybody. Yes, limiting range of motion is important. Optimizing mechanics is important. Working to your build and leverages is important. But also, experience is important. What you feel comfortable doing is important. Generally, you want to move to something that is better and more efficient, but very, very quickly, lifters stop trying to retain things that work and eliminate things that don't, and they just end up experimenting for the sake of it. And every couple of weeks, when you add in another tweak, when you say, well, let me try this first, let me get comfortable with this first, you end up never actually building progress and molding any one technique to your body. You end up just bouncing around, restarting that learning cycle, and no progress is gotten. And then you just get more doubt. You get more uncertainty every time you squat because you feel like there's some cue you're missing out on. Your goal is to pick a goddamn setup and get as good at that setup as possible. Stop with the FOMO. You're not missing out on a magic technique. You're missing out on the months and years of practicing one technique that's going to make you the best possible squatter you can be. Now, no matter what you pick, you have to know what your setup is so you know what cues apply. So you generally need to know where you're at on the spectrum of being very, very upright like an Olympic lifter, being kind of upright like your typical powerlifting high bar squatter, or being very bent over like a very hip dominant kind of equipped lifting style squatter. Now, generally a low bar hip dominant squat's going to have a wider stance. Generally, a more upright squat is going to have a more medium or narrow stance. However, there is room for variation here as well, as your hips will be shaped differently from other people. Some people have their hips pointed straight out to the side, and they can accommodate this weird mutant kind of spider looking squat where they can still dunk their ass with a very wide stance. Other people have their hips pointing straight forward, and no matter how hard they try, they can't get their feet out. Everything has to point forward. So it's important to know that about yourself. Now, if you are a bit more upright, you need to get a lot of power out of your knee joint. You need to optimize how much of your knee is contributing to the squat as a whole. So yeah, you need big quads, but you also need to know how to put tension into the quads. It's very common for more high bar or more upright squatters to conceptualize breaking at the knee first so that they can think about moving into that tension, creating as much tension in the knee joint as possible. This is even more important when you're wrapped because you have extra tension there and you need to make the most out of it. The options we have for cues are twisting your feet, pushing your knees forward, pushing your knees out, pushing your butt back. Now, obviously, you're not going to do all of these at once because I don't know what that would look like. But given your setup, you can pick one or two of these and use them not as a different technique altogether, but as a cue that helps you conceptualize maintaining tension and being a little more efficient in your squat. The goal is to pick one and make it just the way that you squat. These don't work if you just throw them in every now and then. It has to be something you commit to day in and day out. Now, suctioning the ground and twisting your feet is a good way to force the knees to come out. It builds a ton of tension through the glutes, and some people get really good at feeling that tension support you at the bottom. Similarly, when a bench presser uses their lats to create tension for their upper arm to run into. This works for more different squat types. Wide stance squatters can do this. More narrow or medium stance squatters can also do this. As far as pushing your feet out to the side, it's also a good way to get tension in your glutes and to create outward pressure that causes your knees to track out to the side. However, medium to wide stance squatters are going to do this a lot more. If you're a high bar squatter, you're not going to be pushing your knees out. You got to focus on dropping down, building compression and springing back up. That usually comes from focusing on knees forward. You're a high bar squatter, you're standing with the bar on your back, you're trying to focus on getting as much tension as you can out of the hole. You got to get your knee joint loaded up. That means shoving the knees forward and then having the system come down into that tension. And that in and of itself is a trick that requires a lot of practice and repetition. Now, aside from trying to get that rotation in your hips or trying to get your knees out to the side, if you are a hip dominant squatter, tracking your hips back, just simply thinking hips back, sitting into it is a way to facilitate extra hip extension. Because if that's where most of your power is coming from, then it essentially is like a good morning. It's something that you need to sit into with the intent of extending. That's going to lead your squat more so than knee extension. Now, thirdly, we've got where the bar is set up to begin with. It's counterintuitive, but I save this for last because you have to know what your feet are doing to support everything else. Then you have to know what position you're getting into to know which cues you apply. Now that you know what position you're getting into, then you can set the bar and focus on what you're doing with your hands, your elbows, your chest as you squat that works with everything else you set up so far. So obviously the two options are high bar or low bar. High bar up on your traps generally goes with a more upright position. Now there's exceptions to these rules. The reason is that the bar being further away from your hips, every inch you bend forward, you're creating a much, much longer moment arm. So the bar is going to want to take you off the neck. It's harder for your upper back, your midsection to brace, especially with maximum weights. So you only want to go high bar if you plan on being very upright. If you are very upright, you try to set the bar low, you're going to notice it wants to slide off your back. That is a good recipe for breaking a humerus. That's something I saw in person when a young female lifter went into a lever squat in a strongman meet, and she had the bar position too low, too much tension in her upper arm, and it snapped her upper arm. There are also examples of this all over the internet. Now, low bar is great, setting the bar directly on your rear delts with your shoulder blades pinched back, creating all that tension through your upper back. It can help you feel really, really tight, and it can give you a lot more purchase if you do end up tipping forward just a little bit, whether deliberately or accidentally. The bar being lower shortens the moment arm between the bar and between your hips, Again, making your job easier. So especially if you're a hip dominant squatter, that means your hips get to do a much bigger job because the leverages are in their favor. Now, I know some people have kind of done the pigeon wing where they pick their elbows up behind them to drive the bar forward into their shoulders. I believe that's a starting strength move, but I've also done it with success. I've seen other people do it as well. However, that is a lot of pressure on the AC joint. I actually did pop my AC joint mid squat doing that when there was just a ton of tension and I'm cranking my elbow back behind me. These days, I prefer to think of pulling back with my elbows or pulling down with my elbows. And this ties into bracing. If you're thinking about pulling down through your arms, your lats tighten up, it ties into your obliques. It helps snap the locks down like a briefcase. You're pulling your ribs down into your pelvis and it just makes you so much tighter. So I like to conceptualize that. It also squeezes all the musculature in your upper back, gives you a nice shelf to put everything on so you just feel tighter. Now, one really powerful cue when you are hitting the bottom of a squat and you're trying to get that drive back up is to drop the elbows down underneath you. It doesn't have to be radical. You don't want to ditch the bar all the way behind you, but by dropping the elbows down, the bar is going to shift down and back just a little bit. If you're a low bar squatter, it's going to feel like the weight's moving down towards your hips a little bit. So it's going to feel easier to kind of bring your chest out and move everything up in the context of that positioning. Now, this isn't something you do aggressively like leg drive on a bench. I don't want to see people coming into the hole and then dramatically trying to move their elbows. It's a subtle move, a subtle change of position that can help you feel a little bit stronger out of the hole. But the most important thing really is that that bar is glued. Wherever it is, it's glued. It's not at risk of like causing damage to your shoulder or your upper arm, that it feels comfortable, but that you've got all of the musculature of your upper back and through your midsection just tight, stable, efficient. Because when your legs move, when you push through the ground, you need the system to come up. You don't want give. You don't want anything leaking that force transfer. So the tighter you are through your upper back and midsection, better off that squat's gonna go. So these are 3 big squat pointers. I think we're holding back a lot of people. Knowing what your feet are doing, feeling tension from the start, making sure you're aware of what your patterning is, no matter what you select, that you're committing to it, getting good at it, and that you're choosing cues that are appropriate for that specific setup. And lastly, that bar position. Does it match the rest of your squat? And do you know how to maintain tension without creating other problems downstream? If you can do all 3 of those things, you are going to have a beautiful squat and you've solved the problem of finding your best squat setup. Now, the issue is not finding the best technique or cue that's going to add 20 pounds to your squat. Now it's just a matter of repetition, getting good at what you selected. That's the easy thing. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Let me know what you think. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.